All right. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. We're going to talk about how long does it take for a mortgage LOS upgrade, for anyone who's interested right now. And there's been a lot to talk about this. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Ryan Senek in a minute. If you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to that at the end of the session. And if we're not able to get to all the questions, we'll provide the questions over to the gentlemen in this group so that they can provide an FAQ as a follow-up item for everyone. So please share your questions with us. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ryan. Thank you.
Well, wherever you are in the United States, it is morning. So good morning to everyone. Welcome to a Meridian Link and TMC Thought Leadership webinar. And hopefully we can make multiple of these moving on into 2025. This series is very important to us to share with you because on fairly often, actually, we'll have prospects coming to Meridian Link and saying, I really need to make a switch or an upgrade, of my mortgage technology. The one that I currently have just isn't fitting the bill. It was a great solution for me back then, but it's not going to take me into the future. But one of the things that actually happens to prospects at times is they don't start their diligence early enough to actually get through the process before their contract actually ends. We heard that enough to where we decided to make it a thought leadership webinar. And joining us on Time in the Upgrade, How Long Does a Mortgage LOS Upgrade Really Take, is going to be Vincent Fury. Vince and I came over actually in Meridian Link's acquisition of Open Close Mortgage Technology just about a little over 2 years ago now. He is the Senior VP of Mortgage Sales at Meridian Link. And also Lester Ali Tag, who is that's a fun name to say. And so if you ever want to give him a call, Ali Tag. And he is the Services Program Manager at Meridian Link. And Lester, you've been there, is it 19 years?
You're
muted, my friend.
I think about a little over 16.
16 years. Okay. So, well, his knowledge is so vast, I gave him an extra 3 years.
There you go.
So moving through the slide presentation, we just have some general jargon, copyright notices, in terms of disclaimers, et cetera. So that is out in the open since Meridian Link is a publicly traded company. Moving forward, overall, today's agenda, we're going to go over three main topics. One, of course, is vendor due diligence and the selection process. Second, which Lester will walk you through, is going to be implementation overview and timeline phases. And then third will be hindsight lessons, which are just some quick lessons that after going through the entire diligence and implementation process, that our customers had given feedback on us on what they would have done differently internally. So you'll hear it a little bit more from the horse's mouth. Now, before we get started, I'd like to do a poll. Mimi, poll. I was asked to say poll. And our poll question is, how long will your mortgage LOS upgrade take from start to go live? So in your opinions, how long will your mortgage LOS upgrade take from start to go live? The options are 1 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months, 13 to 18 months, 19 to 24 months, or I don't know. So feel free to put I can't vote, I don't think. No, I can't. But feel free to put your information into that poll. And we will wait a few seconds for people to put that in. I already X'd out of my screen, so I'm not sure if this is my first time doing a Zoom webinar, so forgive us. We actually generally use Goldcast, so we're utilizing TMC's platform. So Mimi, is that enough time to run the poll?
That looks great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So moving forward, timing your mortgage LOS upgrade, a timeline. So Vince Fury, wealth of knowledge in the industry, he's going to take over from here, and we're going to go ahead and dive into timing your mortgage LOS upgrade, why the timing matters for your financial institution. Vince?
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. So when we put this together, we didn't want to just look at the project, the implementation project itself, because there's a lot of things that have to occur leading up to that, and obviously are part of the overall timeline. So things to really make sure that you consider in the process is, where's the market shifting and where are your resources going to be aligned in the process. You want to be able to time the project so that you're potentially not looking at a go live point in the months of May, June, when the purchase market is really really heating up. You also need to look at things like how do delays in the process impact the ROI? And a big component of that is at what point does the vendor implement the monthly recurring fees? So a lot of times we see scenarios where the monthly recurring fees are implemented early, short, in a short timeline after initial contract signing with complete disregard for when the customer goes live. And obviously that can have significant implications on the overall cost and on the associated ROI. And then let's say there is a delay. I mean, delays happen in many different areas. What does a 30, 60, 90-day delay look like? Whether it's, resource alignment delays it, and what does that do in impacting the cost and the ROI? And then really looking at, start of, okay, we're pulling the lever to start looking at vendors and starting a due diligence process. What's our buying process look like? What's the point that we're going to make a selection, kick off implementation, and what's the remaining time to implement, knowing that you have an existing contract and what that looks like in terms of expiration. You always want to make sure that you're targeting a go live as close to the expiration as possible, so you're limiting the dual cost of, we're burning down pipeline on the legacy system while you're ramping up on the new system. We're going to go through this in a little more detail.
Now we're going to head into a next second poll question just to get a little bit better of an understanding of where you are in the market. The poll question is, when did you last upgrade your mortgage LOS? So the options are 0 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years ago, 10 plus years, or I don't know. Give a few moments for people to answer that poll question. Great. And so next we will move on. Vince will continue on to your path to a mortgage technology go live. Take it over again, please, Vince.
Yeah, so there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to go into it in detail, and I believe, Ryan, I think we're going to share the deck post, so you'll be able to see this. But this kind of breaks down the entirety of the project from, I'm going to look at the marketplace of what vendors are out there. I'm going to take it through the process of my buying review, due diligence, and buying process to ultimately select and contract a new vendor. And then I'm going to kick off an implementation project that's going to take me down a path to ultimately go live. So this kind of illustrates that. And I think the subsequent slides, we're going to talk in more detail, what's the buying process, kind of what's in the earlier part of this path, and the things that we see pretty consistently in every project, so that you have those items on your radar as you plan your own.
And this is also, Vince, a little bit as a generalization, right? Some different things can change depending on size of the institution, overall approvals needed, where you are in terms of steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, just in general. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think, if we're talking specifically about the due diligence, the vendor selection and due diligence process, we see projects pretty consistently kind of have the same milestones, so to speak. So it's very important that you understand what your own institution's buying process is. What's the process I have to go through for budget approval? Does it require executive sponsorship? What's my InfoSec and due diligence requirements? Is there a substantial InfoSec questionnaire and associated due diligence material that has to be gathered and submitted? Does it require board approval? If so, what's the timing of the board meetings? What's the target date and specific board meeting that I want to have all of my final selection and business case put together? Is it going to require a business case? If it does require a business case, Are you looking for the vendor to help you with that business case, because the vendors will? So there's multiple milestones in that earlier process that if you treat the due diligence and selection process as its own project, you will be much more timely and much more successful.
And what goes in, Vince, in terms of people doing research overall on potential solutions before they even get to the RFP process or the contacting of prospective mortgage LOS solutions?
It's a great question. One of the things we see consistently is customers are not or lenders are not evaluating their tech stack consistently. We hear often, well, we're going to be evaluating it 6 months from now or 12 months from now. And the reality is you need to be evaluating it constantly and identifying where the tech stack is working for you and where it's not working for you. Because part of the process is really analyzing what you're currently using, what the gaps are with what you're using, confirming their actual gaps and just not you fully utilizing the capabilities of the system, and then determining a list of requirements. You know, what's the ultimate outcome I want to take to go through this process, and ask the really tough questions. You know, you need to decide, is browser-based, cloud native, is that a mandatory requirement for the organization? What does that even mean in terms of system and performance? But really, you know, we see, I was speaking at a conference last week and I was joking, but I really wasn't. We see, you know, RFPs and RFIs where there's questions like, does it calculate LTV? Does it calculate CLTV? Can you run DU? Of course it does. None of the LOS vendors that are in the marketplace would be in the marketplace if they didn't do all those things. So don't worry so much about the normal stuff that every vendor, significant vendor in the marketplace is automatically going to support. Ask the tough questions. Ask the things that are, you know, that are things that you really want in your business to impact it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. And that's both in terms of feature function and in terms of underlying technology. I mentioned earlier, you know, cloud native, browser based. Are you fine with a thick client? Apparently, you're not allowed to say fat client anymore because it's not politically correct. So now you have to say thick client. Are you okay with thick client? Are you okay with proprietary VPNs? Are you looking to host yourself, or are you requiring vendor hosting? Those are all things that you need to determine prior to kicking off the process. And then when you do kick off the due diligence process, it narrows the scope of the vendors that you want to include in your review.
And in terms of timing too, Vince, we're primarily talking about months out from expiration, but what we've learned through the customers that we've brought on, the new customers that we've brought on, is that regardless of where the market is, the timing for a technology upgrade is always good, because you're going to generate enhanced efficiencies, potential profitability. Improved mortgage tech can also be a great recruitment or retention tool for loan officers. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear people, it's like the automatic question, well, is how fast can you implement? And my response is always, well, fast isn't necessarily good. There's probably every vendor will respond, oh, we can implement in 60, 90 days. Well, yeah, every vendor probably could, but it'll be absolute murder for everyone involved. Keep in mind that the professionals that you're going to have engaged in the implementation process have jobs that they're responsible throughout the day. And this is a new process that you're introducing to them to balance with all of their other responsibilities. So too much time is never bad. But the key is you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time. You never want to be up against the wall, against a contract expiration. So you want to give yourself enough time that you can comfortably move through the process, The biggest part, make sure everyone has the time to be effectively trained, that you have the time to effectively test the system, because testing is kind of an extension of training, as well as, you know, when I'm running an FHA, docs on an FHA loan, am I getting the right docs out? So testing is solidification of training, and also, you know, the kind of minute aspects of the system functionality. And you want to make sure that you have enough training and testing time so that everyone's migrating confidently. You know, we've seen people, you know, take a test for a week and go live, which is a terrible thing to do. I would never recommend that. But we always include, and Lester, correct me if I'm wrong, we, in our project implementation project plan, we always put in 60 days of testing, so that you can control your own testing schedule throughout that process. The other thing to really keep in mind is the test scripts. You know, for us as a LOS vendor, we're doing this every single day. Probably most of the people on this call might do it, you know, 1 or 2 times in their entire career. And it's really important that you organize the test scripts across, you know, all the various programs you have and different variations of those programs. We have all kinds of job aids we provide customers to help them with developing their test scripts and associated testing plan. And there's lots of really good consulting firms out there that are very familiar with our system, and others that can help in that process as well. But you just want to make sure, again, it's not about rushing, it's about doing it right, making sure everyone's appropriately trained and the system's appropriately tested, so that everyone's moving to go live in a very confident manner.
And just one final thing too, it's also about the mindset that you go into this process with. Some people will look at when their contract is expiring, they may look at this as a risky proposition. The opposite is actually true. This is an opportunity actually for you to answer the problems that you've had with your solution over the past 3, 5, 10, 15 years. And when you're going through the analysis, be honest with yourself. Make sure that people are honest with you about how clunky or the lesser functionality of your existing system. So then you can actually address those pain points and find a solution for you, again, that's going to move you better into the future. Any thoughts on that, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's also an opportunity to really look at how you're doing things, because in many cases, you know, we're moving customers off systems they've been on for, you know, 5, 8, 10 plus years, and they've kind of adjusted the way they do things based on the limitations of the system they're on. So, and we see it often where, you know, someone gets into a project and it's almost like they're trying to recreate what they already have, because that's how they do it and that's how they've done it. And you really need to look at it, take a step back and look at, you know, why are we doing it this way? You know, how can we leverage how the advantages of the system to change the way we're doing things to become more efficient? Because, you know, if you're dealing with systems with, you know, performance gaps that creating a bunch of workarounds kill efficiency. But if you're dealing with a system that you're forced to do that, we see customers almost trying to push those same workarounds into the new system. And you have to be really open to changing the way you do things to leverage, you know, how the system's designed to automate processes, to get rid of those workarounds and get rid of that inefficiency. And don't try and recreate what you already have. You're leaving the system you're on for a reason. Part of that could be, you know, economics. Part of it is typically, a heavy part of it is typically feature function. So leverage the feature function of the new system to change the way that you move loans through your process to gain that efficiency. You know, this business, I've been in this business since the early 90s. There's only so many ways to push that pig through the snake. but the system can automate a lot of those functions to make it more efficient and have less hands in the process.
Great, thanks, Vince. Now we're going to get into our next poll just to have an understanding a little bit more of our viewers and participants today. Which mortgage LOS do you currently use? Is it ICE Mortgage Technology, Encompass, Dark Matter, Empower LOS, Finastra Mortgage Bot, Mortgage Cadence, or is it another? So of those options, which mortgage LOS do you currently use? Give a few more minutes or a few more seconds for people to take the poll and to input. Great, thank you. Now we're gonna send it over to Lester. Oh, there's a live poll. Okay, well, that was cool. Great, thank you. And to Lester, I'm gonna turn it over to you to go over a little bit of the implementation project overview and where to get started here.
Yep, appreciate it. Again, thanks everyone for your time today. Just a few things to think about, and kind of my perspective of where I'm coming from is maybe the more practical sense, working with customers in the implementation area, right? Not the sales, but actually delivering it. So a lot of the rest of these slides are be targeting those more practical things that I wish, people would think about or hope that they did during the sales cycle. And so one of the first things to think about in terms of asking your LOS vendor, and Vince touched upon a lot of things. These are just two questions of many. But how much of your time is going to be needed to be successful in this implementation work itself? If we think about things, as Vince mentioned, your staff is already working their day jobs to push those production volume through. And so ask your vendor, how much time do we need to potentially take away from production in order to work on this implementation stuff, right? So understand that, and that's going to form a good baseline of how you need to think about realigning your resources and priorities. And another question to consider of many is, what kind of resources will you need to be successful? Does that require developers, IT, consultants? Sometimes folks will say, oh, you don't need any of that. But poll, kind of see who else is implementing that system. Do they actually need that? Like, it's not required, but in a practical sense, is that really necessary? Those are things to consider. And kind of the inverse option for that is, maybe I don't need those folks, but who do I need? Right? Do I need SMEs? Do I need to take people off my production in order to work on these things? And so those are the kinds of things to help prepare yourself. And I think, Ryan, we have other questions that we'll be handing out as for those that are interested to kind of gauge, again, preparing your mindset and your approach for what the next steps would be. And so those are just a few questions to ask your mortgage vendor.
And beyond that, Lester, I think you want to ask yourself some questions, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something that Vince touched on as well. You have to ask yourself, not just ask your vendor the tough questions, but also ask yourself, what are those tough questions? And some practical things, though, is when will I lose access to my current system? We talk about starting at the end, right? So if we look at when I'm actually losing access, well, I can't do business anymore. Then you start working your way backwards and trying to reverse engineer essentially your starting timeline. What is the latest that you can start? And then give yourself some buffer, right? So those are some things to consider. Also, sure, we have the end in mind, but are there any hiccups that are going to come in the way? So question number 2 is, do we have any conflicting priorities, right? Are there things that are going to get in the way of just streamline working on this implementation? A lot of times I'm so surprised. Folks will come in, they'll start and say, oh, by the way, we have an audit and we're going to disappear for 2 months. And we're like, you should have told us this at the beginning. So we kind of have an idea of what our project timelines are actually going to be. So those are just some things to consider. Are we going to be in a busy season or a less busy season? And is this the right time? Do we have to account for that and start a little bit earlier because we know we're going to come up across some of those things? So again, a few questions to ask yourself about your own readiness and your own ability to take on such a project.
And as Lester mentioned, we're also if you're interested, what are the other key questions? Because due to time restraints, we had to greatly restrict what are the key questions to ask yourself and your vendor. So if you would like to receive the remaining key questions that you need to ask yourself and your Mortgage LOS partner, I don't know if this Zoom has the capability to raise your virtual hand, but if it does, please. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Lester. Lester, you want to get the doc? I'll send it to you, my friend. Raise your virtual hand or put into the chat, send me Lester's questions, and we will get those off to you in due haste. Moving forward, we're gonna have another poll. Given recent volume growth, what is your goal? Is your goal in order to get to 10 to 25 loans a month? Maybe 26 to 100? Maybe you're a little bit larger of an institution and you really want to crack that 100 barrier, but you can't seem to get over 300 loans a month, or 301 plus loans a month, or you just don't know. Maybe that's not your role in terms of where you want to see your ROI from a new system. But if you could please choose one of those 5 answers, that would be fantastic. Give a few more seconds for that to be filled out. Back to you, Lester.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more. So we saw in regards to starting at the end, when we're losing access and we're talking about reverse engineering, how much time do I actually need? Which are things that you do want to understand going into any engagement or planning for it. Most systems, most vendors will kind of have these different phases of an implementation project. Of course, the details are going to differ depending on who you're working with. But generally, we're talking about there's going to be some readiness prerequisite areas that you'll need to take care of. Then there'll be some time of configuration, some time of testing, some time, of course, you're going live, and then also planning for that loss of access. So the next few slides, again, in the constraints of time, we'll go this rather quickly. We'll talk about each of those areas. So the first area, that first phase of prerequisites, often we hear, we're ready, they're going through the sales contracting and sign it all. And it's like, I'm ready to go. I want to go. I'm raring to go. And when we start engaging with customers and it turns out they're actually not ready, this is an actual common risk that we see with folks. They have the desire to move forward, but they're not actually ready in terms of maybe their vendor contracts. They're still shopping for vendors. They're still getting their investor approvals if that's something they're working towards or trying to build into. And so that can be a big risk in terms of delaying the rest of the project. And so that's something to be mindful of, understanding where you need to be and what you need to have ready in order to be streamlined in your start of the project. So a lot of projects we see, unfortunately, not a lot, but some projects, they kind of get delayed before they really get started. And sometimes even that's in regards to responsiveness, right? You would think you've done all this diligence to go through the contracting and move forward, and then kind of ghosting your vendor. Don't do that, right? Be sure to engage with them, answer the information that they're asking for, because their goal, right? Their job is to get you live and running on the system. So be nice to your vendors and respond to them and be ready. And if you're not sure what that means, what readiness means, of course, ask that during that sales cycle. Now, there are a lot of things that you can do to mitigate that. Again, it's really engagement, communication about those things, asking those questions. They're not the how do I calculate LTV, but they're more so what can I do to have the most streamlined and be ready to start this project. So again, a lot of times it's just having the pieces in place. We like to say mise in place, right? So in terms of cooking, you have all the ingredients prepped and ready so that when you start cooking and you're throwing everything in the pan, everything's ready right in front of you. That's the same thing that we're talking about here. All the stuff, all the vendors, right? All the service providers, your credentials, your test cases, your approvals, your contracts, having those ready so that everything's ready within arm's reach, so that when we're starting to implementation, no one has to stop to go to the grocery store. So again,
thank you, Chef.
No,
thank you, Chef.
If I could add one additional thing here, I think team structure is something you really need to take a look at. I mean, it's critical that you have a defined project lead, and it's best if that project lead comes from within the business, so they understand how you do business, they understand your workflows. and then a project team that consists of representation from each functional discipline in the organization. Someone that's representing the sales side of the organization, the processing, underwriting, closing, funding, and that point person, that's the project lead, has the people in each functional area that they can interact with for certain deliverables that are required throughout the process. Probably the number one thing we see, and Lester, correct me if I'm wrong, if a project begins to seem to go off track, it's because an organization starts to silo responsibilities to the project, meaning, well, John's in secondary, reach out to him for that. Mary's in underwriting, that needs to come from her. And we'll call timeout immediately if we see that happening, because that's an immediate indicator that things, to Lester's point, that communication is going to break down. So it's critical that you identify that right point person in the process.
Keeping an eye on time, we just have 8 minutes, so we're going to move on to the next slide in terms of configuration, common risk mitigation.
Yeah, absolutely. Configuration, think of there are things that don't exist in that new system, like your users, your branches, your fees, whatever that might be, that need to be configured. There's workflows that are going to be specific to you. Hopefully you're working with a system that has some pre-configured configurations that are there for you to start, so you don't have to start from scratch, right? And so a lot of things that we see during this time is now we're trying to be ready to get our hands on, right? And so during configurations, that's what we're trying to do. Now, some of the risks that we see during this build phase or configuration phase is not inviting the right people. You talked about, Vince mentioned, having the right people. If we're going to be talking about conditions, make sure the underwriter is going to be there during those discussions about what you're going to configure. A big risk that we see is analysis paralysis, just undue delay in making any sort of decision. Sometimes resistance to change is a big thing that folks will have. Vince touched upon this earlier as well. That's how we've always done it, so that's what we're going to try to repeat. Don't do that. At least don't try to do that 100%, right? Your existing system is essentially what it is and how you're using it based on your processes are based on your existing system, right? And so if you just try to replicate that 100%, you're not taking advantage of what your new technology can do for you. And so you have this vision for your organization. Let's try to utilize why you chose this new system and lean into that and embrace that in order to take advantage and get your most ROI. Some risk mitigations that we're seeing here, be organized. There's a lot of things that are going to be in place that you don't want things to fall through a crack. So how are you going to be organized? Does your vendor offer a project management system? Again, be open to embracing new functionality. A lot of your processes are based on probably workarounds, right? But you don't realize it because you've been there for 10 years and that's just what it is. And again, strong leadership and buy-in. This starts at the top, and it trickles its way down. When it comes to, hey, I have to work on implementation stuff versus production, how do I allocate my time? And so those are, again, some of these are mindset things and approaches that we want to think about as we talk about configuration and eventually throughout the rest of the project as well. Let's move on.
Move on to the test phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of testing, any significant competitive LOS, they're going to have, of course, you calculate LTV, of course, you calculate CLTV. So a lot of testing really is more so user acceptance testing. It's an extension of training and learning, right? It's actually learning. And so what you want to do in the test phase is gain confidence in being able to originate live loans. And so there's common areas that's their LOS is one piece, but your doc vendor, right? You don't want to go live without making sure your disclosures and closing packages are spot on. Same thing with your pricing and eligibility. Are your profit margins built in and all that? And then kind of a big other testing area you want to think about is your life of loan. Can everyone do their job, right? From an originator to a processor to an underwriter. Are they comfortable doing their job in this new system? And incorporate that into your test phase. Because if you think about it, you don't want to go live and then all of a sudden have a bottleneck because someone doesn't know how to order a credit report or whatever that might be. So those are some things to be mindful of in addressing during your testing area. And a lot of it is just getting over that learning curve. Now, there are a lot of things that you can think about to be successful in testing. One is having a documented workflow. I know this is not an official poll, so don't put a poll, but how much of your processes and procedures are actually documented? Maybe this is the time to do it. Are you able to keep track of your progress? Have some tools available. If you don't have some, your vendor should be able to help you be mindful of how you can track your progress in your testing. Being strategic is relevant for both your testing scenarios, as Vince had mentioned earlier, but also your staff that's involved, right? So you want to have the right staff, the right people for this change that you're trying to do with your technology. And sometimes, we have detractors in our organization that no matter what, I'm not going to want to change. And so sometimes it can be addition by subtraction in terms of, who should be involved in a project. And so if you know who you're thinking about there, well, it's not a poll, so don't raise your hand, but just be mindful of that and who you have involved and having the right folks involved.
And just keeping an eye on time, we were hoping to have a few minutes for Q&A. We may not get to that because we have a hard stop at 11:45. So if you do have questions that come up along the way and you haven't put them in the chat, please feel free to do so. And if we can't address them today, we will get back with you. Moving forward, let's talk about Go Live.
Yeah, go live. So just consider this. We have the end in mind. What does this mean? Are there any servers that need to be migrated, and do they need retesting? That needs to be accounted for. So make sure whatever that end date of we're totally for sure live accounts for any server migrations if that's relevant. And then be mindful of, there's the implementation. Yes, that's important, but after you're live, are you going to be able to support your team, right? For any internal questions that they may have. So keep that in mind. Similarly, how is your vendor going to support your team if they have questions at that time as well? Good questions to ask, and just be assured of what that's going to look like so that you can plan accordingly and be able to support and retain, build, and just have a great adoption of this new technology. You put in a lot of work to get there. And so how can you capitalize on that momentum, right? We've got it. We're confident doing live loans. We're doing it. And now what does the rest of that process look like? Let's not lose that momentum. So just some things to think about there.
Great, thank you. And then what about the old LOS access loss, Lester?
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to minimize, as Vince mentioned, the amount of dual work in multiple systems as you're rolling out or completing out your old pipeline. So your real target is of being live with your new system shouldn't be when I lose my old system. If anything, it's more so 30 to 60 days before you lose access to your old system. And that way you have time to finish out that old pipeline and, complete its life, get all the closing docs, everything that you need, wrap it all in a bow so that you don't have to worry about trying to migrate data and then kind of, especially from a disclosure perspective, total nightmare trying to do that. So that's just something to be mindful of. You want to target 30 to 60 days before you lose access as when you're going live with the new system.
Great. And then critically important also are hindsight lessons. Which one of you would like to touch a little bit on some of the things that customers have said that they would do differently internally?
I'll jump into some of these. So
Perfect.
a lot of the themes that you're going to be seeing here are what people wish they did, right? So I wish I would have had more loan officer involvement so I could have tested more thoroughly. Testing is not an afterthought, nor should it be. It should be part of the plan. And you can see here, I wish I had more leadership support to enforce testing. So there's the plan of testing, but when it comes down to I have production and my staff is going to not do what they're being told, how do you enforce that? So it's some things to be mindful of. People never wanting to change. I had to pry my users' hands off the legacy system. That is a not uncommon thing to see. And again, the last item here, definitely would have stayed on top of each role to ensure they tested everything that would be needed so that they're comfortable doing what they need to do. So again, a big piece here is everyone wish that they tested more, accounted for that in their time and the priority.
And
Lester,
I'll
since you
add
said
one
I
thing.
wish, go
Oops,
ahead, Ben, sorry.
I was just going to add one thing. I know we're getting short on time here, but it's really important to not try and do everything. You know, in our case, you know, we have a very sophisticated workflow automation rules engine, automated tasking engine, that can be enhanced over time. So, you know, there's base automation and rule configurations that Lester's team is going to, you know, best practice implement in the process. But when you're implementing, you really don't know what you don't know at that point. It's always good to start operating on the system. So when you really know, you know, what you know, and then start tweaking the workflow, tweaking the automation, tweaking the rule configuration to best support and automate what you're doing in production, as opposed to when you don't have that full vision of what the system can be.
And one of the reasons why we say at Meridian Link that you don't need a Mortgage LOS vendor, you need a Mortgage LOS partner. There's a lot of things, like Vince had mentioned earlier, you may not have been through an Mortgage LOS switch before. You may not have been through one in 10, 15, 20 years. You need that partner to help you through the process. And whether that you choose to upgrade your Mortgage LOS solution to Meridian Link Mortgage or any other competitor product, that's just something to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you have someone who's there for you and not just going to get you up and, you know, let you do all the running and do it on your own. And Lester, I do have to say, you said, you know, maybe it's the fact that I was born in the 70s, but you said, I wish so many times. I'm now thinking of the Skee-Lo song. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. So if none of you on this webinar were not thinking that, you will probably be humming it or at least Googling it if you don't know the song. Maybe I'm not sure if we have enough time to hop into questions. So one last poll. Just would you like to receive a detailed version of this PowerPoint? If yes, raise your hand or put in the chat. PowerPoint, yes. And that would probably be better actually to put it into the chat. PowerPoint, yes. And we can send that off to you once we have some closure with this webinar. So in terms of Q&A, Vince, at 11:43, I don't know if we're going to have enough time.
We don't have any time for Q&A, but
Right.
you know, myself and Lester, if you want to bounce anything, ideas off us, or just get our opinions on anything, and like I said earlier, I've been doing this since the early 90s, and Lester's been running our services practice for nearly 16 years. So we're happy to answer any questions. We're, you know, TMC partners just like yourselves, and my contact information is here. That's my actual cell phone. Thanks, Ryan. But but feel free to text me if you want to text.
Hey, you're a partner.
You know, we're happy to help and answer any questions, regardless of where you are in a potential evaluation.
Great. Mimi?
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That was very informative. And we've taken down the names of everyone who had raised their hand and made a comment in the chat. Thank you very much for your participation today. And we appreciate you guys for sharing these good content with us. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.